welcome once again. Let's begin.
Good evening all, and welcome. When you put an object in front of light, it creates a shadow. But there are times when shadows form their own and behave independently, as you're about to find out. So for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. As much as I do believe in the paranormal, I don't usually get the opportunity to experience it firsthand. I want to start off by saying that being from Hawaii, there are many superstitions that I still follow to this day, in respecting my ancestors and understanding my culture. I work in the film industry, and sometimes where we shoot tends to be in certain sacred locations back in the old Hawaiian days. For example, if it was just me on a hiking trip, I would have done to chant an oli to grant me safe passage. However, this job pretty much disregards those types of locations if it's considered a tourist area. We were filming at Waimea Falls, which has a rich history of the paranormal, located on the island of Oahu. As the day was wrapping up, I found out one of the crew members left some equipment back at the falls, and I volunteered on retrieving it. It was completely dark, and it was about a 10-minute drive via a quad to trek up the narrow path towards the falls. I had a colleague help me in locating it in the forest, to no avail. I kept feeling eyes were watching us, and we shouldn't linger any longer. We decided to leave, and got back on the four-wheeler to head back to base camp. As my colleague was trying to fix the gear, the headlights were beaming our exit. I glanced over to see a shadowy figure standing in the middle of our path. Thinking in my head, that's not right. I looked away, hoping it was only an illusion of some kind. I blinked, hoping I wasn't crazy, and I turned to see if the figure was still there. To my horror, the shadow figure stood 10 feet away from me, blocking our path in front of the headlights. Mind you, these lights were on high beam, illuminating the front road and all the darkness tucked far back except for the figure. Trying not to cause any alarm to my colleague who didn't want to notice the figure, I quickly closed my eyes shut and told him to hurry up and drive. He asked what was wrong, but I didn't budge until we were back in our well-lit environment. I felt ashamed for causing a disturbance even though it was unintentional. I sent a prayer before my departure and hoped the being could remain at peace. But that experience was a shocker for the first time. Thankfully, it didn't follow me home. This incident happened last year in 2019. Unfortunately, I don't have any proof for the fact that I was completely chicken under those circumstances. Mahalo nui loa for reading this story. And please do not piss off any ghosts on your excursions, people. I've never actually told anyone about this, but when I was 11 and my siblings were in my room playing Halo, we had 2 controllers, so we're taking turns, and I was just watching my brother and sister play. My room had a bathroom connected to my sister's room that always paranoid me, so I left the door closed and locked. I noticed that the door was open and went to close it thinking my brother may have opened it. And then it was my turn, so I started playing. When I finished, I noticed that the door was open again. I told my brother very adamantly, "Keep this door closed, stop opening it." He and my 2 other siblings claimed they didn't open it. I closed it again and sat on my bed staring at it, seeing why it was opening. All of a sudden the door slams open and I see some cloudy shadow that looks like a person of about 5'8" move into the bathroom. I didn't say anything and just bolted out of the room into the living room. I refused to go back into the room for about 2 months and slept on the couch every night. As I said, I never told anyone about this, but I assume my mum sort of knew what had happened, because about a year ago my mum was telling me stuff she saw in the house and never mentioned it because she didn't want to scare us. My dad also had a similar experience in that house, like seeing someone lean over him when he woke up at night. That was the only experience I had there, and now I'm a bit of a skeptical on the paranormal and think perhaps it may have been my imagination, or maybe airdrafts opening the door, but I guess I'll never know. I've never seen shadow people from my peripheral vision. They're always a few feet away from me, but right in front of my field of vision. I've only ever seen them at night when my room is quite dark. Generally, something rouses me in my sleep. I'll open my eyes, and there it is, a dark, humanoid figure, which I always initially assume is a family member out of bed and trying to awake me for some reason. I'll then ask them what they're doing or why they awoke me. But when they say nothing and remain still, I'll grow annoyed and continue repeating my questions until they just gradually dissolve before my very eyes. This is the moment where the fear sinks in, and I realize this clearly wasn't the family member I thought I was just aggressively speaking to. My point here is that these dark humanoid figures are already present, so I don't see how they materialized in the first place. As I lay beneath my covers, I kept my eyes on the corner of my room at the foot of my bed. As I stared into the patch of darkness and shadow where the two walls met, I felt like my eyes were playing tricks on me, because it looked as if the shadow was undulating. I kept my eyes fixed to the space, and slowly but surely the shadow grew larger and morphed into this big, dark, round humanoid figure. I say rounded because it was kind of like a featureless, heavy-set Santa body made out of super dark shadow. I'd never seen anything like this before. He was wearing a hat. He had a kind of large sombrero and just stood there motionless once manifested, and seemed to be made completely from shadow, as though the thing just pulls in and sucks in a patch of deep shadow from a space in the room and uses that to form his space. It was a really trippy experience, and I was a kid and quite scared and remained stock still, staring in shock for at least 20 seconds, trying to gain the courage to scream out to my parents in the next room. I still remember counting to 3 in my head before I finally had the guts to scream, "Mom!" I closed my eyes while screaming, so this time I wasn't able to watch the thing depart or dissolve. My parents took mere seconds to enter my room, and once they were there, my eyes opened, and I looked straight back into the corner and the thing was gone. I never saw one like that again. The others are always quite skinny. One thing for sure though, each time I've had an encounter with a shadow person, even though I've now had quite a few, I'm always equally and unsuspecting at the time before, and I always feel the same initial frustration while not receiving a response, right up until that cold fear takes over upon their eerie and unexplainable departure. 20 years ago, I was sleeping beside my husband, and I woke up. As I was turning over, I look over at my husband's shoulder and saw a woman standing in the bedroom doorway staring at my husband intently with curiosity. She then began moving towards him. She had no idea I was watching her. When she began walking towards him, I got angry, and I was going to launch myself over him and tackle her, but she was too far away. I was concerned I would wake my husband, and he would get up suddenly, causing me to hurt him. Instead, I turned over, got out of bed, and went around, but by the time I got to the end of the bed, she was gone. This was no common intruder. She was approximately 5 feet tall, very slim, but with a definite female figure, around 100 pounds. She was not clothed, but looked like a solid silhouette, or as if head to toe in a skin-tight black bodysuit. She did not have hair on her silhouette. Why can I describe her so well? She was less than 12 feet away from me, and this was not the first time seeing the paranormal, so no shock or fear. But although I did not mind paranormal encounters, I do not let them come near my husband. Can anyone give any hints as to what she was? She seemed solid. I could not see through her or any details in the hall. She was darker than the surrounding night, but it might have been the moonlight, and we have skylights in the living room downstairs. When she realized I saw her, she stopped and felt surprised. I have also found info on shadow men, but this is a woman, not a shadow, and not sinister. Does anyone know what this could possibly have been? This story took place roughly 30 years ago. Me and my best friend Emma were rebellious teens. We were both 15 and hated going to school. It just wasn't our scene. At the time, we lived fairly close to each other and would often hang out at each other's houses. We'd sometimes even skip going to school and explore the local woods so that no adults could see us. It was on these excursions that we found the house of an old lady. Her name was Mrs. Bateman. We never got to meet her, but we saw her and said hello. That's about the extent of our conversation. Her house was in the middle of the woods, decrepit, practically falling to pieces, and she seemed absolutely insane, talking to herself while sitting in the garden on a chair that was surrounded by forest. It was an extremely odd place for a house, and we assumed that it must be because she owned the land, and were worried that we were potentially trespassing. But at 15, you'd think you're above the law and everything else. Well, one day, we hear, through some mutual friends, neighbors and stuff, that the lady, the crazy lady specifically, that lived in the woods had passed away. The very next day, we're talking about it at school. And seeing as I really didn't want to do geography, me and Emma decide to head up into the woods to see if we can see the house, maybe even the dead lady. Obviously, she'd been removed by this time, but we were teenagers and quite oblivious to how the world works. We started setting off. It was around 2 p.m. because we were skipping our final lesson. As we were walking through the forest, we knew no one would be none the wiser. This is where Emma started to pipe up, saying she had a bad feeling about doing this. My only intention, of course, was to look at the house from the outside. I never really had any intention of going in, and just to see if I could see the body. There was this morbid fascination surrounding me. I wanted to know what happened to this woman and why she suddenly passed. What made people say she was crazy? And how did they know she was dead? I convinced Emma to carry on going, despite her relentless protests. It took us about 20 minutes of walking when we finally reached the house. There was no one there, which surprised me at first. As we approached the door, we looked through the windows, cautiously, scared that she might jump out at any moment despite people saying that she'd passed. There was no one in sight. That's when I got the guts to try the door. I slowly lowered my hand to the handle and started pulling down. At that very moment, it opened and I had a satisfying grin cover my face. Emma was scared. She dared not venture into someone's house without permission, but I did. I told her that we'd be quick. We'd just be exploring. No one was home, and the lady had passed away anyway. As far as we knew, she didn't have anyone to leave the house to or anything, so we were doing everyone a public service by seeing if there was anything worth taking. I know, it was pretty crappy of me. Spoilers, I never actually took anything. In truth, I was just trying to entice Emma to go in, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, continuing with the story. She followed me in because I wasn't going to stay outside, and looking up at the sky, it looked like it was going to rain. So, I guess all of the reasons meant that she was going to come in. The house, as I mentioned before, wasn't in a very good state. She was a hoarder. There were newspapers piled up all around the place. The electricity was still working, but it was a dingy little place. We looked around the kitchen, and it smelled disgusting. Clearly, she hadn't washed dishes in a long time. There was food waste accumulated on plates and stuff that was going moldy. She'd only been dead a few days, I thought. How could all of this have accumulated so quickly? In any case, we carried on looking around. The house didn't have a very welcoming atmosphere, but I just assumed I felt uncomfortable being on someone else's property when deep down I knew I really shouldn't be. We went up the stairs. The rooms were bare and barren, except her room, which had a whole host of trinkets on the little sideboard and table. Then we saw the last door at the end of the upstairs hallway. We tried to open it, but there was a small catch above us that appeared to have a lock. At that moment, Emma recalled that there was a tiny key which seemed to fit the lock over on the dresser in the other room. She went over, fetched it, and like a charm it worked. We opened the door and were instantly hit with a wave of cold. We wondered if this was because this part of the house was in disrepair, but regardless, we took up the wooded stairs and started making our ascent. It's important to note that her house was carpeted, but these stairs were wooden, which gave it an extra creepy feel. There was no light switch as we were going up, so we were going up in full darkness nearly. By the time we reached the top, we tried using our hands to see if we could find any form of switch, when finally we found one, an old-fashioned one. We flipped it, and we were greeted by the darkness of the loft. There wasn't really much about. A few picture frames covered by a sheet, an old chair, nothing really of interest nor value. It was interesting to be up here. Having been in lofts before, I knew that you had to be careful, as there were lots of beams and wooden planks, and stepping in the wrong place could mean you fall through the ceiling, as it's not that stable. After we had a good look around, we were just about to leave when my friend Emma shrieked and ran downstairs. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't reply. I looked around the loft room and didn't see anything, and just as I was about to flip the switch and make my way down, did I look directly into one of the corners of the house, near an area I hadn't really been paying attention to. There was a figure, a shadow. It almost looked like a man, just standing in the corner, slightly crouched. All I could make out was the shape, no features. I stared at it, I blinked, and it was still there. At that point, I just about crapped my knickers and decided to run down the stairs, leaving the light switch on out of pure fear. Emma had already made it down the second set of stairs and was just about to leave the house, screaming at me to run out. I bolted, left the house, and we fled and went home. We were chilling at our house for a while, talking about what had gone on, hoping that my brother wouldn't overhear, as he had been at school, and we really didn't want him to know that we hadn't been there. After saying in whispers how freaked out we were, we both asked each other what we'd seen, and when we concurred it was the same shadow man, did our excitement fade to fear. We really hoped we hadn't disturbed something, and that's when we realized we never even closed the door. It was about 6 p.m. at this point, and fairly dark. The forest and house weren't too far, but we really didn't want to go back. But part of me was worried someone may have seen us leaving that house, or that we might get in trouble. Now, the teenage stupidity had all but dissolved, and was left the real possibility that we could get in trouble for our stupidity. We knew we had to go back. No one closed the door. I even left the light on upstairs. What if people saw? What if people knew it was us? We gathered up our courage and a torch and started making our way back in the dark. The streetlights guided us most of the way, and that's when we got to the entrance of the forest. We walked in with our torch to guide us. It wasn't the best, visibility was limited, but we made it to the house with the torchlight. When we arrived though, the door was closed, but the light was still on upstairs and was leaking through and could be seen from one of the top windows. Emma said she didn't want to go in, but went in anyway, as I knew it was my responsibility. She had the decency to wait at the bottom of the stairs and said that if she heard me shout she was going to run, and she'd meet me in the forest as she had the torch. I flipped on the light switches and started making my way up the stairs, hoping to hell I didn't see anything. My eyes were darting around the house, absolutely terrified, scared that at any moment this shadow man would appear out of nowhere and do who knows what to me. Every step was painful, and when I made it to the upstairs landing I took a sigh of relief as there was nothing. That's when I saw the door. The door was closed. The upstairs door, I mean, the one that would take us to the loft. I had most certainly left it open, but perhaps in my haste, it had bounced back or something. Although it was open the whole time, I tried not to think about it, and I didn't want to make any noise, so I took off my shoes and started slowly creeping up the stairs. However, one of the wooden steps betrayed me, and it made a loud creak. I just about had a panic attack there and then, hoping that the entity wouldn't hear me. I was going up step by step. I could see the light switch. I was just about to flick it, and then I did. A wave of relief washed over me, as I crept down a little louder now, content that I had done what I needed to do. I slipped on my shoes and started making my way downstairs. But when I got to the bottom, Emma was no longer there. Oh no, I thought. Where did she go? The door was closed and I never heard it open. Me being as quiet as possible, I doubt she would have left. So instead of opening the door, I looked out of the little square window in the door, but there was no light around. I walked out of where the stairway was and into the living room to see Emma stood stock still and terrified, staring into the kitchen area. I instantly saw what was scaring her. There was the shadow. It was now a lot more pronounced than before. The light leaking in from where we were was meeting the darkness of the kitchen, but it was very clearly visible. It was radiating a dark and fearful aura. Maybe this is why the old woman went insane, I thought. And with that, I grabbed her hand, closed the door on our way out, and ran like I've never ran before. I don't think in all my life I've run any faster. This was Usain Bolt proud speed. We made it back to my house, sweating, panting, crying, and hugging at the end. We were so relieved and vowed not to get up to any mischief again regarding people's property we shouldn't be in the first place. That's our story. We never saw the Shadow Man again, or even approached that house. We stayed out of the woods for a long time. In a way, I think this experience helped us, as we were too scared to even venture out of school, and ended up passing all our grades reasonably well. But we both never forgot. Even though as we grew older our friendship drifted apart, in my 50s I actually moved back to the area, and she had never left. A few years ago we were talking at a bar, and this event came up. We spoke of our memories and how terrifying it was, and both could relate exactly the same thing to each other. I knew it was never just a story. It really happened. But God, it was the scariest moment of my life, and really made me believe that there's something else out there. This event occurred on the 29th of October, 2019, between 6:23 and 6:27 a.m., Eastern Time Zone of the USA. My daughter, who was nearly 4 at the time, had woken me up that Tuesday morning right before Halloween. I felt awake and perky that morning, so I grabbed my black glasses and put them on my face, got out of bed, then stood facing the wall, which the door is located on, to slip my feet into the purple woolen slippers as I do each morning. This morning, however, was different. I had an extremely difficult time getting my slippers on, no matter how I moved my feet. The slippers moved millimeter by millimeter, and my feet chased them, unable to slip inside. It would have been comical how much trouble I was having, or it would have been had it not been slightly irritating and frustrating. However, determined, I continued to slowly chase my slippers with my feet as I checked the time. The clock was by the door, and it illuminated that it was 6:24 a.m. Meanwhile, I watched my daughter bound towards the door, and despite my protests, she threw it open. Peering out into the dark hallway, I noticed something pure black, much darker than anything else, and began processing what this could possibly be. My dad had placed several items, a small bookcase and a lamp, as well as other stuff outside the bedroom door on the wall opposite my bedroom door and the bathroom door to the left of my room, so I assumed the blackness was some sort of office equipment. Yet I continued staring, and an uncomfortable feeling began rising in my chest and stomach as I made out the shape of a nose on a head, and I was viewing this at an angle rather than head on. My slippers were still not cooperating either, as I had the sudden thought, oh God, is that a shadow person? I chided myself, rolled my eyes and laughed internally, thinking I've been watching too many paranormal shows on the Travel Channel, or perhaps too much Mortis Media. But at that moment my discomfort and sense of alarm grew, as I noticed that my daughter had not moved once she threw the door open. My eyes widened as I wondered, does she see it too? Looking back and forth between the blackness and my daughter, I suddenly realized that it could lift its arm and touch her. Frantically, I tried to get my feet into the slippers, but it was as if my foot and the slippers were opposing poles of a magnet. I literally could not get my foot inside, for some reason that I can't explain either. I had it in my head that I had to get my slippers on before moving to the other side of the room, so I continued to struggle with my stupid slippers, watching the darkness and my daughter stare at each other. Great parenting, I know, but I think the shadow person had a hand in it. By now, the time was 6:26. Suddenly, an idea popped into my head. I called my daughter over. Baby, come here, please. And for once she obeyed, as the spell was broken. My slippers suddenly allowed my feet into them, and let me tell you, I had felt incredibly clumsy being able to put on a pair of slippers. By the time my daughter had walked the mere 3 meters to my side, I gave her a hug and looked up, and she nonchalantly said, I saw a shadow. It felt as if all my internal organs dropped to the floor. Gasping, I stared at the door. The blackness was gone. It was 6:27 a.m. Where the blackness had been, there was just a lump with a white lampshade and a desk or bookshelf in a blonde shade of wood. Nothing could have possibly had the appearance of a jet black silhouette. Fast forward to yesterday, Thursday, May 14th, around 4 p.m. I walked down the same hallway, but when I stepped in front of the bathroom door, which was closed, did I see the light pop on and hear the fan start, as they're on a single motion sensor switch. Again, the door was closed, so it would be impossible for it to pick up any movement outside the bathroom. Just to be sure, I knocked, opened the door and peered inside. It was completely empty. Now this one I could have rationalized away, except the timing seemed so deliberate, as it was only about a meter from where my daughter and I had seen the shadow person more than 6 months before. A shiver ran up my spine as the memory came back to me. Every time I had to walk past that spot, since seeing the shadow person, I've been afraid, and I think the bathroom light was a bit of a reminder that he is still there. This happened a little over 2 years ago. and I still think about it from time to time. It was October, and I was a senior in high school at the time, and had been sleeping in very late, as I had a terrible case of senioritis. When I woke up, my mother had just returned home, and I said my typical morning greeting to her in the kitchen. She had seemed somewhat surprised when she saw me, and eventually told me something rather alarming. About 30 minutes before I had awoken, she had seen my younger brother getting ready for school. As she had passed by the archway into the living room, she said she saw me standing next to the couch. She assumed I was waking up and groggy. She hadn't thought much of it, and continued on her task of taking my brother to school. The rather alarming part is that not only had I still been sound asleep in my room, but she told me that I had been wearing a grey t-shirt with a specific design on it. At the time, I no longer owned that specific grey t-shirt. I'm not even sure where it went. I was also wearing a completely different t-shirt when I woke up. She said that I had just been standing there with my long dark hair obscuring my face. This chilled me to the bone, as one can only imagine. I got over it pretty quickly though, in the dismissive way a high school senior often does, but I still think about it from time to time. My parents' house has always been rather creepy. I had a few more odd experiences up until I moved out and into an apartment with my fiancé, then boyfriend. On a few occasions I've heard my name being called by my father when I was home alone. A pretty creepy encounter happened a few months after my mum had seen my imposter. I had been putting my shoes on in the dining area as I looked up, and I saw a greyish figure float by the window. It had gone by the first window and didn't continue into view of the second window. It completely vanished. It was broad daylight, as I had gotten a pretty good view of it, even though it had gone by rather fast. It seemed to be wearing a cloak, or a cloak-like grey hoodie. I remember grabbing my bag and running outside, heading down and leaving for school like a bat out of hell. My mother had also reported seeing orbs of light shooting across the ceiling on occasion, and hearing the occasional voice or two call her name, one of them being a child's voice. My parents' dog will sometimes whine at a specific wall in the living room before backing up and running down the hallway like he's terrified. This is alarming because he's a big 100-pound dog. Even my fiancé has experienced a few things. The creepiest by far being the sight of the same possible shadow person I had seen. This was right after I graduated. We'd been cuddling on my bed. I had my face against his chest and my back to the bedroom door. All of a sudden he stiffened and said, "Whoa." He said he saw something zip by the open doorway. It was almost as tall as the door, dark in color, and seemed to be gliding. It also looked to be wearing a cloak of some kind. This is just an estimate, but the door is 7 to 8 feet tall. When he told me this, I immediately thought of the dark, seemingly cloaked figure that I had seen a few months before that. He had also been scratched once by seemingly nothing. Something of these experiences are rather run-of-the-mill haunted house stuff. Others stand out and are more unnerving. The only people who haven't felt, seen, or heard anything odd are my father and brother. This has come to my mind once again, because a few weeks ago my parents had gone out of town, and I had stopped by to bring in their mail and borrow their vacuum, as mine had broken. As I walked through the house to grab the vacuum, a very sudden feeling of uneasiness fell over me. I felt the overwhelming feeling that something was nearby and watching me. I'm not gonna lie, I grabbed that vacuum and booked it out of there. I hardly wanted to lock the place up. Here's the thing, I've always been interested in the paranormal, but this all stumps me. I sometimes wonder if some of the events may have been caused by me. I had played with a Ouija board a few times with a friend when I was 15. There is also an abandoned house about a mile from my parents' home. Keep in mind this is in the middle of the country, long dirt roads and cornfields going nowhere. We'd walked there multiple times and taken pictures on the inside, with broken mirrors, pentagrams drawn on the walls, broken beer bottles, and totally unfinished walls and everything. We even found a child's shoe on this side of the house, and the skulls of some animals in the barn. We were creeped out. On one occasion, my friend, Ali, had turned and yelled, "Bye, ghosts, we love you." Stupid, right? This messed up part is immediately after that. We heard a loud scream from the property of the house. It sounded almost like an animal. Needless to say, we didn't return after that experience. Weirdly enough, any time I opened my Photos app to show other people the pictures we took, the app would crash and my phone would sometimes even die at full battery. Never had an issue with that phone. Afterwards, there were a few times Ali would stay the night and I'd be pinched seemingly out of nowhere and she'd feel her hair be pulled. This stopped after a month or so. Bad choices aside, I've researched all of this as much as I can and feel maybe it's time to get an outsider's opinion. I'm sharing this in the hope that someone might be able to get answers in regard to these odd happenings. More specifically, the ghost who stole my face and the mysterious cloaked shadow person. I'm also wondering why only myself, my mother, and my fiancé have experienced these things. Perhaps we're more perceptive. My brother and father are skeptical. They don't buy into the paranormal at all. My fiancé is very skeptical too, and yet he's experienced these things and has never found an answer for them. He's experienced a few other rather messed up paranormal things in his childhood that he can't explain, but that's a story for another day. The creepiest thing I found suggested his scratches, the 3 long superficial slashes down his back. They could have been of demonic origin, which terrifies me. If anyone has any ideas, please let me know. I could really use with some help. My family has always been pretty sensitive to the paranormal, only on my mother's side, but it did pass down to my brother and myself. The first story occurred when I was about 6 years old. I have a friend called Caitlin. We hung out almost every day. I live in a wooded area, and we have a brush pile of approximately 7 feet. Caitlin came over one day in the middle of winter, and we were sledding down the snowbanks in my driveway. We were about to go on our 3rd or 4th run to solidify the track, and Caitlin froze in her step. I jokingly asked her if she was tired already, and she smacked me and pointed to the brush pile. "Do you see that?" she asked me. I turned and saw a figure there. It stood a foot or so above the brush pile, making this thing about 8 feet tall. It was in the shape of a person, but a solid black mass. Needless to say, we both freaked out because it was just standing there. Then as we ran towards the house, it disappeared. Fast forward 8 years, I'd just turned 14 and we temporarily moved in with my grandparents. I was down in the basement doing some artwork for an assignment, and I felt like I was being watched. I turned around and I remember dropping my paint palette on the ground. There it was. This thing that I hadn't seen in so long was standing in front of me. I had no idea where it came from, and at this point had chalked the previous experience up to being a child with an overactive imagination. But here it was standing in front of my face. I noped out of the basement as fast as I could and started seeing it more frequently every time I went to do the cat litter, which sadly was also in the basement. Every time I was down there painting, and even when I was at school, this thing would appear. I was convinced I was going mad. I ended up calling Caitlin and asked her if she remembered anything odd from when we were kids. She responded with something along the lines of, "Not really, besides the thing in the brush." Now I knew something weird was happening. She remembered the experience as vividly as I do, even though we hadn't spoken about it in almost a decade. I'd recently moved into my new house and figured that would be the end of it. But nope. First night I was in the basement, the figure was back. I still see it to this day over 10 years later. I have no idea what it is. There's so much more to tell with this entity, including a near-death experience. I just wanted to put this out there, to see if anyone knew what it is. A few weeks ago, I was staying with my mum, grandfather, and uncle in a small cottage in Cape Cod, probably built sometime in the late 60s. My mother and I were staying in a room with two twin beds about 6 feet apart on each side of a small room. We had driven there late, and everyone was settling down to go to bed around 3 a.m. The very first night that we were there, it was around 3:30, and the lights were off and my mum was already asleep. Now I 100% know that I was tired at this moment, but I was completely awake. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. I was laying on my side in the direction of the bed, facing my mother, and suddenly I blinked, and the next thing I know, a pitch-black shadowy figure with womanly features and long hair hanging down appeared in front of me, clear as day, and whispers, "Hey, shh." And for a short moment I thought it was my mum, but when I looked she was asleep and the figure was gone before I could react. I spent the next 2 hours freaking out, practically having an anxiety attack with my heart racing, trying to play off what I just saw. My mother doesn't believe in the supernatural and says it was my imagination, but I am a college-age man and know for a fact that I was completely awake when I saw and heard what I did. I felt incredibly uncomfortable in the room the next 3 nights, as we were there and slept facing the wall. I didn't even dare to flip over and face that wall again, and I swear I heard light footsteps the next few nights in that room. All aboard the Nope train. When I was a kid, probably between 8 and 10, I used to see shadow people in the night. It happened almost every single night. It was so frequent that I just got used to them. They never scared me when I saw them. They would just walk against the wall and watch me while I was in bed. I remember they never had clothes, they were just a figure or body. They used to open my door at night, and I'm pretty sure one of them whispered my name into my ear at night, before bed, while I was brushing my teeth. I was in the washroom with my cousin and sister brushing our teeth before bed. They finished before me, and I was alone upstairs and I could feel something behind me but didn't acknowledge it until I heard a really faint whisper of someone saying my name right into my ear. All I remember is freaking out and running downstairs screaming that someone just said my name. There was also this one time I was playing hide and seek with 3 of my siblings, and after finding 2 of them, we were looking for my sister and toys started being flung from her room. Being kids, we laughed it off, went running into the room looking for her, but there wasn't anyone there, and we ended up finding her hiding in the basement. I also remember I used to suffer from 2 different night terrors when we lived in that house. One of them I still can't explain to this day. I can only draw a picture, but it's hard for me to do because of how traumatizing it was. The other was a dream of me walking down the basement and finding a little girl curled up in a ball in a box crying. The strange thing about that second dream is that my younger brother had the exact same dream. He's 17, I'm 23, and we still agree that's some messed up stuff going on in the house. I was sleeping pretty tight, and I think it was something like 2 to 3 p.m. You know, when inside your house is totally dark, but not that pitch black darkness, more like a bluish darkness. Anyway, I was sleeping like a rock. Trust me, because I woke up all of a sudden without the sound waking me up, and the door of this room was open. I can clearly see the short corridor and part of the living room. And then I looked to the living room to see something tall, 100% black and wearing something like a coat, standing near my boyfriend's grandma's feet, and I was paralyzed. I stared at the entity for a minute or so, and it wasn't even bothered that I was looking. I looked to my boyfriend's bed, but he was asleep, and I wanted so badly to wake him up, but I was scared that if I moved, I would rouse the thing and it would approach me. Maybe if I stand up or stick my leg pretty close to his, I'll wake him, I thought. but I was afraid the entity would look my way. So I tried pressing my eyes together to see if it was a hallucination. But it didn't vanish. It was standing there like a real person. So after deciding that I couldn't do anything about it, I closed my eyes with my heart pounding on my chest and fell asleep. In the morning, I heard from my mother-in-law that his grandma wasn't feeling well and had to go to the hospital. I can't say how freaked out I was, but I didn't tell her because she's skeptic. But I told my boyfriend what happened, and from that day on I've always been afraid to wake up in the middle of the night in case I see something I don't want to. I was 16 when this occurrence happened. It was 2:40ish in the morning. I tend to stay up late. It's something I did a lot in my teenage years. I went out to the kitchen to fill my water bottle up, and I also ended up grabbing a snack. As I turned to go back to my room, I saw something through my sliding glass door. I should reiterate I was living in an apartment at the time, all the way up on the 3rd floor. I thought I was just seeing something, but I started to walk over to the door and it got closer. I'm telling you, I just about crapped myself. I ran to my room so fast, it really freaked me out. Also, after that had happened, it occurred many other occasions. I'm so glad we finally moved out of that place. So many things happened. Today I woke up very tired to see this short but lanky humanoid figure. It was like a naked grey child with a faceless oval head. It also did not seem entirely physical. Immediately after me seeing it, it ran and jumped onto the floor out of my view. I hesitated for a second, but still very quickly sat up to see where it went, and it was gone. My mother then walked in immediately afterwards and asked why I had that look on my face. I stayed silent and said I didn't know. I tried going back to sleep, but heard my floor creaking, so I checked under the bed, which is where I thought this creature, which I was in denial of seeing at the time, would have been hiding. But it turns out there were tons of containers under the bed, so it wouldn't have been able to hide in the room. I didn't actually know about the containers because I was sleeping in my parents' bed because my grandmother was visiting and using my room. The rest of my day had been weird, and I'd just been tired and depressed. I'm willing to accept that this was just a dream or something, but I wanted to know if this in any way sounds familiar to some creature or phenomenon, something you guys may have heard of. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's adventures into the Shadow Realm. If you did, be sure to let me know down below by dropping a like, leaving a comment and doing all the good stuff. I'd like to extend a huge thank you as always to my wonderful patrons for their continued support and help. It really does mean a lot, and help keeps the channel going. If you'd like your name in the end credits, as well as a host of other awards, you can find the link in the description. Thanks guys. But for now, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.
This is